Welcome back to Upgrade to General, a series to help you upgrade your amateur radio license to General Class. This episode is Sub-Element G1, Question Group E, and I'm your host, Ron Call, KE7CR. Let's begin. Question 1. Which of the following would disqualify a third party from participating in sending a message via an amateur station? So just briefly, let's talk about third-party communications. It's where you have an amateur radio operator sending a message for somebody else that does not have an amateur license. Now that's perfectly legal. Generally, the rule is the amateur radio operator has to be at the control point of the station. The other person can actually do the communicating, they can talk on the air, but the amateur radio operator has to be in control. That's the general rules for third-party traffic. Now, the answer to this question would be the third party's amateur license has been revoked and not reinstated. So the idea is the FCC does not want people who have abused the amateur radio privileges and had their license either revoked or suspended. If they're under some kind of cease and desist order, they do not want those people using the amateur system, the amateur radio frequencies and the amateur radio system to do communications. They've already been flagrantly in violation of the rules or are under investigation for that, and so they don't want that happening. Other than that, third-party traffic is perfectly fine. Question number 2. When may a 10-meter repeater retransmit the 2-meter signal from a station that has a technician class control operator? Now, remember there are some segments on 10 meters where repeaters are allowed, but those frequencies are not allowed for technician class operators. But if a technician class operator is transmitting on 2 meters, for which they have all the privileges on 2 meters, and a general class operator is on 10 meters, the general class operator can retransmit on 10 meters that 2-meter message. So the answer is only if the 10-meter control operator holds at least a general class license. Question number 3. What is required to conduct communications with a digital station operating under automatic control outside the automatic control band segments? Now, an automatically controlled digital station means any station that is unattended and which transmits data modes. The answer to that is the station initiating the contact, which is often called the interrogating station, must be under local or remote control. So a control operator has to be at that station locally or under remote control of that station that initiates the contact to the automatically controlled station. Next question. Which of the following conditions require a licensed amateur radio operator to take specific steps to avoid harmful interference to other users or facilities? Amateur radio operators should always take steps to avoid harmful interference. So when you look at these answer choices, it has when operating within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring station. That would be correct. Choice B, when using a band where the amateur service is secondary. That's also correct. We already have 2 correct answers. Choice C is when a station is transmitting spread spectrum emissions. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then choice D is all of these choices are correct. Well, choices A and B are both obviously correct. C could also be a good time. And in fact, when you consider that amateur radio operators are always supposed to take steps to avoid harmful interference, then the best choice is D. All of these choices are correct. Next question. What are the restrictions on messages sent to a third party in a country with which there is a third-party agreement? Third-party messages are fine inside the United States, inside the jurisdiction of the FCC. They're also fine in other countries where there's a third-party agreement. If countries have specifically said they do not allow that, that's when you can't do that. The best choice and the answer in this question is they must relate to amateur radio or remarks of a personal character or messages relating to emergencies or disaster relief. Next question. The frequency allocations of which ITU region apply to radio amateurs operating in North and South America? The ITU, again, is the International Telecommunications Union. It's part of the United Nations, and they divide the world up into regions. North and South America are Region 2. Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and the northern part of Asia are in Region 1. And some of the Middle East, the Far East, China, India, Indonesia, and Australia, that's Region 3. Interestingly, Antarctica is divided up into the 3 different regions. There's a portion of Antarctica that's region 1, another portion region 2, and another portion region 3. So the answer to this question is region 2. Next question. In what part of the 2.4 gigahertz band may an amateur station communicate with non-licensed Wi-Fi stations? No part. Amateurs are never supposed to communicate with non-amateur stations. Well, I should say there are very, very rare exceptions where amateur stations can communicate with non-amateur stations. So the best answer here is no part. The next question says, what is the maximum PEP output allowed for spread spectrum transmissions? So it's a question about power output. How much power can you output on the spread spectrum transmission modes? So let's talk for a minute about spread spectrum. The idea behind spread spectrum is to take an emission mode that normally has a narrower bandwidth and intentionally spread it out over a wider bandwidth. Some of the initial reasons for this thinking were for military security, stuff like that, where you could, if you spread the power level over a wider bandwidth, then essentially it would just, if someone intercepted that message, it just might sound like background noise. See, under these spread spectrum conditions, the transmission is spread out over a wider spectrum. It might shift from frequency to frequency, and the receiver has to be in sync with the transmitter to know which frequencies to shift to pick up the message. So it was a good kind of a security mode, maybe for military communications, or it's not really encryption, but it was a way to increase the reliability and security of that transmission. Nowadays, for amateur radio, spread spectrum emissions are kind of the basis of a lot of high-speed multimedia networks. A lot of data modes can use spread spectrum emissions to increase reliability of communications and reduce interference. It's a very interesting thing for amateurs to take, say, old used Wi-Fi equipment, off-the-shelf commercial equipment, modify it, hack it to be used for high-speed multimedia networks. So the answer to this question about power allowed, the rule is 10 watts maximum. Next question, under what circumstances are messages that are sent via digital modes exempt from Part 97 third-party rules that apply to other modes of communication? And the answer is under no circumstances. Third-party rules apply no matter what mode you're using. Next question, why should an amateur operator normally avoid transmitting on 14.100, 18.110, 21.150, 24.930, and 28.200 megahertz? The reason is a system of propagation beacon stations operates on those frequencies. Now again, no frequency is, owned by anyone for a particular reason, but when a beacon is trying to transmit, it would be very poor etiquette to operate on that frequency and interfere with that beacon station. Beacon stations are a benefit to everybody, so let's stay off those frequencies and allow those beacons the best operation that they can. Next question, on what bands may automatically controlled stations transmitting RTTY or data emissions communicate with other automatically controlled digital stations? The answer is anywhere in the 6 meter or shorter wavelength band and in limited segments of some of the HF bands. You can look up the frequencies on HF if you want. The last question, when may third-party messages be transmitted via remote control? Answer is under any circumstances in which third-party messages are permitted by the FCC rules. So it's really no different to transmit third-party messages by remote control than by local control. It's just the same. You just have to follow the FCC third-party regulations. Alright, that's all for this group and for this sub-element. We're finished with the Commission's rules questions. The next episode will be sub-element G2, operating procedures, and there are 5 groups of questions. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. This is KE7CR 73.